Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We'll prepare for a messy commute tomorrow morning as snow is about to fall on Metro Vancouver. We'll get the latest weather forecast around the province with Darius Madavi. And stories of burst pipes seem to be everywhere as we go through this deep freeze. Has it happened to you this week? How are you dealing? And on the housing crisis in BC, we head to Oak Bay, where the district says meeting targets for multi-unit housing is a tough ask. Can the province's plan to build more in cities work? I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. I'm Michelle Eliot. Well, that deep freeze is still with us, and now we're about to get another dump of snow. Snowfall warnings are in effect for more than 24 regions in the province. And here on the south coast, we are expecting up to 20 centimeters of snow overnight. Environment Canada says a low-pressure system is rolling in. The CBC's climate and science specialist, Darius Madavi, joins me now in studio. Hello, Darius.
Hello, Michelle.
You were here yesterday, sort of fingers crossed, hoping for the best.
Yeah.
But
I was a bit optimistic. Yeah. As you might, I don't know. Never bet against the European model, I think is what I'd say. I was optimistic that, the models were kind of split. We might get a good forecast where we got a little bit less snow, a little bit more rain. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case. That Arctic air is taking a little bit longer to roll out than we thought. We have these outflow winds blowing through the valley, and that's going to hit the island, reach the island as well. And as that low pressure system full of warm Pacific air rolls in, they're going to meet and just drop a bucket loads of snow across, right through the valley, across the lower mainland, and then into over the island as well as throughout much of the interior. So now the latest estimates are suggesting that here in downtown Vancouver, we could get, even at sea level, as much as 10 to 20 centimeters of snow throughout the valley, and at higher elevations across the Metro Vancouver, we could also see as much as 30 centimeters of snow. So it's going to be quite a dump across the island as well. A lot of snow coming even from places like Victoria that don't they usually escape some of the wrath of these systems. In the West Coast, even some places might get just a little sprinkle, but East Coast of the island as well, up to 15 centimeters. It looks like maybe 20 by tomorrow evening. So we might even see some rain and freezing rainfall on top of that snow as well, making it just a really messy commute, both tomorrow morning, because the snow is expected to arrive at around 10 p.m. tonight, so not really affecting our evening commute, but tomorrow morning going to be nasty, even into the afternoon and evening. I'd expect the commute after work to be a little bit messy as well, because that snow is expected to continue right through the working hours into the afternoon and evening.
Make those alternate plans if you can now. Darius, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Darius Madavi staying on top of that weather forecast, our climate and science specialist here at CBC British Columbia. And we are going to cover more on the snow incoming with the Ministry of Transportation in just a moment. We're also touching on the cold, because that has caused a lot of burst pipes around the province. Anecdotally, I've heard from several just in my circle who have been dealing with frozen pipes and burst pipes. We have an expert to answer your questions in a couple of minutes here, and we're asking you, has it happened to you this week? How are you dealing with those frozen or burst pipes? What's the impact on you? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, you can let us know at bctoday@cbc.ca. And we are seeing the impact of that flooding at Mission Memorial Hospital. Their ER had to close due to burst water pipes. And the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation's Burnaby location closed as well. Here's CEO Wayne Leslie.
The only way to describe it is to call it a mini lake or a lagoon. It means for at least this week, all of our programs and services have to be done virtually. It's not ideal because ultimately, as you would expect with health and education services, in person is always the best, especially with a disability, developmental disability like Down syndrome.
That was Down Syndrome Resource Foundation CEO Wayne Leslie. Now, the trouble with burst pipes is impacting nonprofits and hospitals and homes and apartments as well. Here to give us some tips is Darren Miller. He's the owner of Insurance Restoration Pro in Chilliwack. Darren, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
What are the calls you're receiving?
We're getting a large influx of calls with multi-unit dwellings, condo complexes. A lot of the fire suppression systems in the attics are busting because of the extreme cold in the attic spaces. A lot of frozen hose bibs that for the outside taps, those are causing a lot of issues, more so when it starts to thaw. That's when we start finding those issues with those outside taps, as well as water lines inside the homes, exterior walls. When it starts to thaw, that's when everything starts to flow a lot more, and we see those starting to an influx of calls with those, but a lot more with multi-unit dwellings and fire suppression systems are bursting.
When you say fire suppression systems, so like sprinkler systems?
Sprinkler systems that are charged, ready to put out fires, and they're vulnerable in those attic spaces where there's no heat. So all of the living spaces inside the units do have heat, but in those attic spaces, they're typically at the temperature of outside or just a little bit below.
Why are these problems, why do they seem to be so widespread in this cold snap?
I think it happens whenever you get to this temperature. You do find an influx of those suppression systems, those fire sprinkler systems breaking or shattering. It tends to happen at this temperature, as well as those hose bibs for the outside taps. They're vulnerable if they're not shut off during the warmer times, prepped so that those hoses are disconnected. They're vulnerable. You get a lot of that wind-driven cold air blowing right up against houses, and they're vulnerable places. With open soffits of houses, you get that wind-driven cold air going into the attics. So all these places are really vulnerable for homes and buildings.
And these are record-breaking temperatures here in BC. Are there building codes or requirements in other provinces, in Alberta or in Ontario, for example, where they perhaps may be more accustomed to colder weather?
I'm not too sure about the building codes in other provinces. I know that we are prepared, usually with all the building codes put in place, that it does put at those levels that they are ready to accept cold weather. But when you get a combination of wind-driven cold air, there's a lot that really can't stand up to that. If you have insulation that's not in those particular areas, that maybe because blown insulation is usually in those attic places. So when you get wind-driven cold air, it'll blow that insulation out of the way, and it'll expose pipes in those spaces that are vulnerable to that cold air.
My guest is Darren Miller, the owner of Insurance Restoration Pro in Chilliwack, getting a lot of calls on burst pipes and fire suppression systems, those sprinklers bursting due to the cold, and the wind is affecting houses as well. Want to hear from you. Are you affected by this week, and how are you dealing with it? You can give us a call if you have any questions for Darren as well. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, pound 690. And Darren, so how long do these kinds of things take to fix?
I think the main thing is response time, because there's a huge influx of calls coming in. So limited to resources for contractors that are able to actually get to these homes or buildings. We're usually expecting those natural or those normal response times throughout the year. But when you have, we call it like almost like a mini catastrophic event where you have a large influx of calls, multiple buildings, in different cities, it really ties up a lot of resources. So I think having the patience of getting these contractors to the site to dry out the structure, so there's a lot of removal of of wet materials, if contents are affected, people's belongings. Sometimes they need to be temporarily placed into motels or hotels through their insurance company or however that's being utilized. Those contents need to be taken out and stored in a dry, temperature controlled facility while the contractors are removing all the affected materials. We bring in commercial drying dehumidification systems and air movers, and we dry the structure out and get it to the point where all the reconstruction can happen with those properties. But with all this influx, that's going to extend the time of all the reconstruction schedules, because you have all the subtrades that are being tied up, drywall, flooring, all that type of subtrades. So it's going to be an ongoing process for a few months.
That is one long list. If someone is facing flooding right now, what should they do then?
One thing I would recommend is know where your shutoff valves, your main shutoff valves are in your home. Usually they're typically in your mechanical room where your hot water heater is placed. That's that immediate pipe that goes right into your hot water heater. So know where that is with your shutoff valves. Know where your city main shutoff is, and also look up the phone numbers for your local municipality, for your city contractors, your city municipality, because they have the ability to come in and shut your system down to your home in case maybe it's broken just before the main shutoff valve, and even though you do have a shutoff, you're not able to turn the system off because it's broken between your home and the city. So they would have to shut that off themselves.
Okay, so contact your city. Gabby is joining us from Cranbrook. Hi, Gabby. Are you dealing with a burst pipe?
Hi. I'm not actually dealing with a burst pipe, but I have a question. Ever since we've had this really deep cold, I've been hearing random pings and pops and other metallic and other sounds from my attic. And it's a very narrow space. It's a hard place to get into, but this is unusual. Like, I don't hear sounds like this ever in normal temperatures. And I'm wondering, I haven't noticed any effects in my house. So I'm assuming everything's okay, and I don't know, things were just settling or maybe buckling a little, but is that something that you would send a professional to investigate, or just assume everything's okay if, everything else seems normal?
Gabby, thank you. So those kinds of sounds, are they a bit of a warning or no?
It's a lot of time, if you know your home, if you know where your plumbing lines are, where your water supply lines, sometimes people have hot water heaters in their attic. It's very rare that happens. Most of the plumbing is residing on your first floor, and then it feeds throughout the home to your different water supplies. What I find too, with all that cracking and popping, sometimes it's the trusses, the wood that's expanding and contracting, or rubbing up against each other as they're contracting. So that sometimes is that sound that you get that would reverberate through your home too. But just find out if you do have any plumbing lines in your ceiling or in your attic. That would be something to find out. But typically that would be the structure of your home is doing a shifting and a contracting with the cold temperatures.
Okay.
So really not too much to be concerned, but I would still be finding out where your plumbing lines are.
Okay, so that's the first step that you can take, Gabby. Thank you very much for the call. Chris is in Victoria now, and you can speak to different building codes, Chris?
Hey, yeah, I know I got to be quick, so I'm just going to throw out a flurry of information here.
Sure.
I've worked in multiple provinces, and the plumbing code is actually different in the prairie provinces, for example, where you have a frost line of 8 feet because like all of your lines, water, sewer, everything like that have to be below 8 feet because that's where your frost line is, right?
Oh, okay.
Now I've worked over in the shoe swap. That frost line is now 4 feet. Right, to avoid that freezing, and then you get onto the island and things like that. I almost had a heart attack because the water meters are accessible right in the yard and you can see them. so that a lot of the building code out here, because the temperatures were warmer, allowed for water lines in exterior walls, a lot of things like that, like frost-free hose bibs are not necessarily even a thing out here, and that's causing a lot of the issues too. So the building code needs to be updated, so because we're just going to be getting colder and hotter and colder and hotter.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. Thank you very much.
Yep.
And yeah, that's interesting to see the differences, right? Where in places like Saskatchewan, where they are more accustomed to colder weather. Chris, thank you. That's a good point that we can probably push on as well and keep following. Darren, I assume you're very busy. I really appreciate your taking time out to speak with us. And this is very useful information. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Darren Miller is owner of Insurance Restoration Pro in Chilliwack. It's 21 minutes past 12 o'clock, past 1 o'clock in the Mountain Time Zone. And this upcoming storm system is going to impact the majority of the province's roads and highways. And so here to tell us more about what we can expect is Janelle State, Deputy Regional Director for the South Coast Division with the Ministry of Highways and Infrastructure. Hi, good afternoon, Janelle.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. So what are the plans to keep those major routes clear?
Yeah, so our contractors have been out in full force. So we're taking a look at the upcoming weather system in the Lower Mainland. We have on both of our structures, we have our rope access technicians ready on those structures if we see any shedding. Our contractors have been out with brining and looking at putting materials down in advance of what we anticipate to be some heavy weather coming in later this evening.
There are some trouble spots, you know, the frequent trouble spots. Of course, the Coquihalla Highway has just reopened today after a serious multi-vehicle crash yesterday. This is recurring, right? Drivers have been calling for better safety especially on the Coquihalla and on that stretch just north of Kamloops after a series of deaths. At least 5 people have died in accidents recently. What can be done to address those recurrent trouble regions, trouble spots?
With the inclement weather, we do have our special Coquihalla protocol in place that really sees a significant increase in the amount of equipment out there. We have 3 plows that are dedicated and operating throughout the Coquihalla to help with the road conditions. Again, we have the variable speed limits out there, and a key part of it is just being out on the road if you need to and making sure that you're adhering to the road conditions when you are out there. So it is an area where the province invests a significant amount of resources and will continue to do that to help continue with the safety of that corridor.
But what more could be done, do you think? Because, we hear the same issues every time there's a snowfall.
The Coquihalla, as we have some other highways throughout the province, is through a very mountainous terrain, and it is subject to high volumes of snow over very short periods of time that, again, we do have a protocol in place to help manage that, but there are some times where there is just a significant amount of snow. We do put out travel advisories when we know that is coming to help folks with that. And we work closely with the RCMP as well as our own commercial vehicle safety and enforcement staff to have an increased patrolling lens out there on the corridor, and to also understand if incidents do happen and they are tragic when they happen, to understand what can be done, or are there things that we need to do from a safety perspective along those corridors. So we'll continue to work closely with the RCMP to understand that.
Have you learned anything from previous incidents?
Again, with the measures that we have in place with our increasing maintenance activity, with our variable speed limits out there, those are a reflection and in response to what we see out there. And we'll continue to work closely with the RCMP to understand if there's additional measures we need to implement in the moving forward.
What would be your advice for motorists then tomorrow?
As we move into this weather system, as you say, across the province, taking a look and making sure that if you do need to be out on the roads, you're equipped properly to be out there. Winter tires, making sure you're adhering to speed limits. And in this case, speed limits are posted for ideal travel conditions. And we know that through the late evening and into tomorrow, we aren't going to be seeing ideal road conditions. So reduce your speed limit. Make sure you leave a lot of space between yourself and the driver in front of you in the event something does happen. Make sure you have an emergency response kit in your car in the event that you are having to stop somewhere for a longer period of time. Leave with a full tank of gas. those are some of the measures that folks can put in place before they travel out on the road to put them in a good situation if they are in an area for longer than anticipated.
Sounds like you may have a busy few days ahead. Janelle, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Janelle State is the Deputy Regional Director for the South Coast Division with the Ministry of Highways and Infrastructure.
Thank
It's now 12:25, 1:25 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today. And warming shelters across BC are opening their doors for vulnerable people during this cold spell. Saurabh Sandhu has this report from a shelter in White Rock.
It's 10 to 7 on Sunday morning. Upkar Tatley is ready to roll the wheels of his shuttle to pick up those in need of shelter this chilly morning.
So if you're outside, you're going to feel it in your face a little bit more. So breathing that in, the cold air, a little bit of frozen moisture, it's going to hit you pretty hard.
Tatley heads the Engaged Communities Canada Society, which runs a daytime warming shelter in partnership with City of White Rock, a service that many are thankful for in this extreme cold weather. After a short ride, passengers hurry into the warming shelter to be greeted with some croissants and a warm cup of coffee.
A lot of them like things like extra sweet. I think maybe because it's just so cold out there, like the sugar just helps warm you up.
The shelter also provides clothing, blankets, and medical aid. Meanwhile, Tatley is headed back to the pickup spot, where more people are waiting for a lift.
I would have been very, severely taxed to my limits just to try and survive, much less try and stay warm.
And among the visitors are some with extra needs. But Tatley and his team try their best to leave no one behind.
We see seniors, we see people discharged from hospital, we see people who are so quote-unquote rent-evicted. We also see a lot of folks who actually have really good jobs, but they just don't compare to the astronomical rents, costs of living, food.
The dark of night disappears as daylight breaks over the sky. However, the shuttle keeps moving, looking for others in need of a warm shelter and meal. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, White Rock.
Well, can reducing our personal carbon emissions make us happy? That was the argument from our guest yesterday, UBC behavioral scientist Jiaying Zhao. Now, her TED Talk is called How to Feng Shui Your Fridge and Other Happy Climate Hacks. Her tips included eating more plant-based, but eating meat as a treat if you like, shopping less but looking for better quality, and even rearranging our fridge to reduce food waste. Well, we got a lot of emails from you on that. Michael writes in Nelson, I like your guest's reframing of the efforts to help into being happy about doing things as opposed to it being a heavy duty. Being positive about actions is a good motivation for taking more actions. I use my propane to keep my cabin at 17 degrees Celsius on the thermostat. I light my wood stove with good quality wood from my 20 acres from 6 to 11 p.m. Teresa writes, I'm very happy to make my contributions. I eat no meat. I use bamboo products instead of paper towels and toilet paper. I recycle very carefully and use as little plastic as possible. And Nicola wrote this, I wish more people would reframe time in the kitchen and meal preparation. If you think of it as a great time to spend with family or that chopping veggies can be mildly meditative, it's great for the body and soul. And Palinka wrote, I no longer buy paper towels. Instead, I rip up old sheets. I eat very little meat. I shop local, go to town very infrequently, from the North Shuswap to Salmon Arm or Kamloops or even Chase. I can get pretty much everything I need within 15 kilometers of where I live. Now, there was also some discussion about what meat would be better for the climate. A caller argued eating local beef or dairy just extends time before slaughter and so actually consumes more resources and produces more methane than factories. Our guest also said eating local or organic may not save as much in carbon emissions because of the production. Well, we got some pushback on that through email. Eva wrote, regarding buying locally versus from a distance, there is conflicting research on whether it makes much, if any, difference. However, there are obvious and large benefits to buying locally. It's supporting our agricultural producers, often relatively small scale, rather than enormous international corporations. Farmers markets allow one to get to know the producers and ask questions. My solution is to buy exclusively from a Grand Forks-based organic dairy farm, as I know how well their animals are treated from birth to death. Kimberly also disagreed. We try to buy local meat as it means that the animals have been raised in humane conditions and haven't been forced into overcrowded trucks and hugely stressful situations. Surely eating more green entails more than the bottom line, either monetarily or for the health of the planet. Well, thank you for all of your emails. You can always reach out and weigh in. bctoday@cbc.ca. It's 12:31 now, 1:31 in the Mountain Time Zone. And coming up, Oak Bay is struggling to meet provincial housing targets and the demand to build more multi-unit housing. Well, can your municipality build more? Is that the solution to the housing crisis? That discussion is coming up in a couple of minutes.
Good afternoon. Vancouver police say they are seeing a major increase in hate crimes. They say they responded to 256 reports last year, an increase of more than 30% compared to the previous year. Police say they saw more reporting from gender diverse, South Asian and Jewish communities. Highway 97 is expected to remain closed between Prince George and Quesnel until 4 o'clock today. RCMP say two pickups collided head-on near Cinema early this morning. 2 people were sent to hospital with serious injuries. Police say the recent snow left roads in poor condition. And Environment Canada has issued a snowfall warnings for most of the province, including Metro Vancouver and Greater Victoria. Up to 20 centimeters is expected here on the south coast. The snow is set to arrive late today into tomorrow. Forecasters are also warning about the possibility of freezing rain overnight in parts of BC along the U.S. border. And now taking a look at the forecast, the snow is expected with snowfall warnings covering most of the province, as we mentioned. On the north coast, clearing this afternoon with strong winds and a high of 2. Temperature falling to -21 with periods of snow in the Peace. In the central interior, snow this afternoon with a high of -16, highs from -17 to -9 with snow in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of -12. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, cloudy this afternoon with lots of snow tonight and into tomorrow. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
I'm dreading tomorrow morning already.
Yes, it is looking like it will be a dicey commute.
It will be. I'm already making a mental check of the things that I need to have. Make sure you've got a full tank of gas. We were talking to someone just a bit earlier as well from the Highways Ministry. Those tires, of course, have been checked. Drive slowly. Take your time.
Yes, very responsible, Michelle. Good work.
I don't know. But I also imagine that I'm going to be very stressed. So if I come in and my hair is all askew and I'm just a little bit grumpy, you'll know why.
I don't think either of those things have ever happened. So, all right. We look forward to that.
Yes, Rob, you'll see another side of Michelle tomorrow.
All right.
That's Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Glad to have you with us. If you're tuning in from Williams Lake, you're getting us at 8:60 a.m. and at 101.7 FM in Hope. We're, of course, live streaming on the CBC News app. You can watch us online as well on our website, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. You can watch us again as well. That will be there on demand on the YouTube CBC Vancouver page. And as well, you can always check out our CBC Listen app to listen to the show again, just in case you want to listen to those tips for highway, cold, and winter snow driving once again. To the housing crisis now. 10 BC municipalities have been singled out by the BC government as places in desperate need of more housing and have been ordered to build up more. They are Abbotsford, Delta, Kamloops, the District of North Vancouver, Oak Bay, Port Moody, Saanich, Vancouver, Victoria, and the District of West Vancouver. And within the month, another 10 will be mandated to build more. One of the requirements is to have more multi-unit housing in place of single family. Well, in the city of Oak Bay, the district of Oak Bay, that appears to be a tall order. And we're going to take your calls on that. Can your municipality build more smaller and multi-dwelling homes? And how hard is it to find housing where you live? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. And you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. CBC reporter Belle Puri took a trip to Oak Bay to find out more about their situation. Not a bad assignment at all.
It was quite a nice assignment, yes, indeed, because we know Oak Bay is such a lovely place.
Lovely, beautiful gardens and all of that. But what is their situation right now? What's being demanded of Oak Bay?
Well, on this list that you just shared with the listeners, Oak Bay has been mandated to build 664 additional housing units in the next 5 years. Because right now the situation is, we know it has extensive coastline and a long history, and it's an attractive place to live. But the question is if you can find a place to live, because 96% of its tax base is residential, and the majority of the property is zoned single-family housing.
Wow, single-family housing. Have there been any attempts to build smaller homes to accommodate more people?
Well, the district had a plan before the province stepped in. Their plan targeted 640 new units, but over 10 years. And what they were looking at was, what you called infill. So laneway houses, duplexes, perhaps even units with 4 residential areas, that sort of project. But then the province moved in with this mandate. And if you look around Oak Bay, you do see some 3 and 4 multifamily units, but clearly they date back decades.
So building more, this demand to build more, a deadline of 5 years. How are things going?
They are kind of looking at this assignment and wondering how they're going to meet it, because I've talked to almost all of the 10 communities on that first list. And there are a lot of issues that are common across the board, things like staffing. If all these new applications are supposed to come in, how are you supposed to process the applications if you don't have planners? Who knew there's a shortage of planners across the country? So that, that's an issue. There's issue with construction. The construction industry says we have shortage of skilled labor, and there's various things that have to be taken into consideration. Now, the mayor of Oak Bay is Kevin Murdoch, and he says meeting this target is going to be tough. Let's take a listen.
No, and actually we don't have any intention of saying no. Our goals here are very similar, I think, to what the province is trying to do. Right? We want to see the right housing built and built. We're trying to get barriers out of the way to make sure that can happen. But at the same time, we are an approving body, right? We don't build buildings. We don't build housing. We take applications from, it could be nonprofit, it could be private. But we take the applications and we deal with that. We can pre-zone. We can do lots of things that can kind of encourage that to happen. But at the end of the day, it's really up to the market as to what gets built. So I think from our if I'm looking at this, we are absolutely trying to get housing built, and we're doing everything we can within our power to help with that. At the end of the day, though, we don't build it. So I don't know. We're not clear yet on how the province is going to measure that, but we're not pushing back on this. We're trying to find a way that we can achieve those goals in a way that's helpful.
He doesn't sound too optimistic.
No, it's a huge challenge. And they're not clear what's at risk if they don't fulfill the mandate. That has not been really outlined on what's going to happen. But, as you heard him say, they're not going to say, no, we're not going to do this, but they will try their best. And in Oak Bay, public opinion also is always an issue. And this puts council in a hard place because public opinion, if it's going to shift a little bit of that NIMBY, shift away from that, it's going to take a long time. It's going to be a slow process. And we did talk to people who live in Oak Bay and asked them, and surprisingly, we got a mix. Some people were saying, look, this has to happen because there's too much undeveloped property and housing should go up. And then, there were other people who were saying, we don't really like it, but we understand that people have to have places to live.
So divided there. And so what does the housing minister, Ravi Kahlon, have to say to, that the skepticism or the worry that they may not be able to meet these targets?
Oh, he's very clear in that communities don't have a choice. Everyone has to do their part, and Oak Bay is part of that. I chatted with him about concerns that the communities are voicing. Take a listen.
We want to make sure that they're genuinely trying to address the housing challenge and genuinely trying to take steps to address the targets that we put in place. If a local government decides that they're not interested in helping us address the housing challenges that we do have the ability within the legislation to bring an independent person in to identify what the problems are. If it's resolved, and then we can continue to proceed. If we find that it's just the lack of political will, then we do have the ability as a province to step in and make decisions that are needed in the community to ensure that we have the housing.
So things still uncertain for those municipalities then if they don't
But,
know.
he's very clear in that we'll step in as a province and we'll do it for you if you can't do it. And that's a concern. The mayor of Oak Bay was saying that he felt that the process was not democratic. Initially, when the mandates were put in place, there was no opportunity for communities to have input on the number or even how it would unfold. And now to hear the minister say, if you can't meet your deadline, and don't even get close to it, then we'll step in and we'll do it. And the communities on that first list, the province is going to come back in 6 months. I think we're at the 4-month mark right now, and kind of do a check-in.
We'll see what that check-in entails. And you said the first list. There's another list coming.
There's another list coming. The minister told me that we should expect to see that within a few weeks. So another 10 communities.
Okay. Well, we'll continue to watch this, Belle, and we're going to get some reaction from our listeners now. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's CBC reporter Belle Puri. We'd love to hear from you. Do you think these municipalities can meet those provincial demands to build more multi-unit dwellings? How hard is it to find housing where you live in BC? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. My guest is Eric Protzer, Senior Research Fellow with the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He is based on Vancouver Island. Hello, Eric. Thank you for joining us.
Me here today.
What do you make of the challenges for a district like Oak Bay? And some of these challenges seem to be common among these 10 municipalities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the evidence on this, the hard evidence from research and data is very, very clear that the Canadian housing crisis, like much of the housing crisis in the English-speaking world, is a supply problem, and it is primarily a problem of political will. It's that, there are lots of municipalities, lots of towns that just do not want multifamily housing. And that honestly is the chief barrier to getting things done. So I think that going forward with the new policies being brought forward from the province, that as long as Oak Bay wants to play game, or if another municipality wants to play game, that there's got to be more acceptance of multifamily housing. That's just sort of the way the cookie crumbles.
You heard the mayor there, though, say, it's not that we're going to say no, it's not resistance. It's just that we're trying to be realistic. We're trying to find ways to actually be helpful. And at the end of the day, they're approving, things like licenses or permits, but it's also up to the market. So how much of this does fall to the municipality?
Well, an enormous amount. I mean, it took Oak Bay, for example, 10 years to approve the Quest, about 10 years to approve the Quest, which is a multifamily mid-rise apartment in Oak Bay. The fact of the matter is that the municipalities do have the final say on what gets approved and what does not get approved, and that can hugely constrain what the market is able to do. You have a situation where there is demand for more housing, and it's effectively illegalized to build the supply that people are demanding. So it really does fall to the municipality at the end of the day.
Let's take a call now as we are asking for your thoughts. Do you think these municipalities can meet the demand, will meet the demand for more multi-unit dwellings as mandated by the province? These 10 municipalities, another list to come within the month. And how hard is it to find housing where you live in BC? What difference would more of these kinds of multi-unit, multi-dwelling properties make in terms of adding more supply? As we just heard, it is an issue of supply. Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. We actually have an email from someone in Oak Bay, Lisa, who writes, there are very few of us in Oak Bay that are willing to accept multi-dwelling units. That's the big problem. Unfortunately, most landowners with large properties don't want multi-units near them. I'm not sure how this is going to be resolved, if ever. Lisa, thank you so much for weighing in there. Michael is joining us now. Let's head east to Nelson. Hello, Michael.
Hello, beautiful people. How are we?
Doing well. Thanks for calling in. And what are your thoughts on housing? I understand you want to talk about Kelowna?
Well, I wanted to talk about co-housing as a positive way to solve this problem, and maybe even the resistance of a community. If you have a group of families committed to living together in a co-housing arrangement, that might be more acceptable for small towns or large towns. But I did want to talk about the Kelowna co-housing initiatives. I don't want to take a lot of time on it unless you want to ask me, or Eric has some questions for me.
Sure. Can I just double check, Michael, when you say co-housing, do you mean there's a like a co-op, or people who have, what we hear about people buying together? What exactly do you mean by co-housing?
Okay. Yeah. Like I say, I don't want to take too much of your time. I just, people could find out a lot about it by Googling Interior Co-housing Society.
Okay. And you're saying this is a solution, okay?
Yeah, and the Canadian Co-housing Network at cohousing.ca. And the reason I just wanted to know if Eric knows about any initiatives. In Kelowna, there was an initiative, but because of the land prices and the inability to get contractors and find architects and do all the work necessary to build a community. This is not a co-op, Michelle.
Okay.
Co-housing is a group of people who decide to live together under the consensus decision-making model, build their units, have less private space and more community space, and multi-age, multi kind of financial situations, and just build a community and live together.
Michael,
so I don't know whether you want me to continue.
It sounds like you would like to ask Eric about the feasibility of more of those around the province as well.
Yeah, I wonder if he knows that it's happening.
Okay, Michael, thank you so much. Great to hear from you. Yes, Eric, co-housing. As he describes it, as people basically coming up with an arrangement and, as he said, building together. But I suppose you could also move in together and come up with a financial arrangement?
Yes, that's right. So co-housing is a model that has been adopted a bit more, for example, in Germany and Austria. There have been some examples in the news recently about co-housing in Vienna. I think, my view on the matter is that co-housing can be a part of the solution. I wouldn't necessarily think of it as a panacea, because I don't think co-housing is necessarily for everyone. Not everybody necessarily wants to be in that kind of living arrangement where everybody has a partial ownership of a multifamily building. But I think certainly it should be allowed, and certainly it can contribute to the solution of, the need to expand more supply.
Okay, let's take another call now. And Marcel is joining us from Fernwood, which is just beside Oak Bay. What do you make of the dilemma in Oak Bay, Marcel?
Well, I think that, first of all, I want to give a clap out to Fernwood, because we probably build more housing than like the rest of all the surrounding areas combined. But I think Oak Bay they have been slow on the boat, slow to move, as far as being one of the, most recent areas to a secondary suite, which some Oak Bay residents may really benefit from that additional income. Certainly it changes the vibe of a borough to have, multi-residence and secondary suites. And I think Oak Bay is just resistant to that in general. I hear that there's some, the mayor saying that they're open to working with it, but really the mindset of the residents in general, what I deem is really resistant to having that. And that to me is okay. I don't think that we need to take more people in the city. I mean, where does it end, right?
Okay, so you're saying there is no need to build more multi-unit housing in Oak Bay?
I mean, I'm not an Oak Bay resident, but I do spend a fair amount of time there, and I shop in the area, and I'm not saying that there's not a need for people to have places to live, but not the people that already live here. I feel like we take in too many. Like, at what point do we just stop the whole city from growing, right? Victoria, Oak Bay, Esquimalt, whatever.
Okay. And more people moving to the island, right, Marcel? I understand you work in the contracting industry as well?
Yes, that's correct. I'm a general contractor.
What's the demand that you see for housing?
Well, I work primarily in home renovations. So when it comes into or secondary suites or garage conversions into living habitable places, is more our expertise. And we do focus in Fernwood, which I'm very happy to say. But for our few clients that we still have in Oak Bay, I think there is a desire for, I don't know, maybe 10% of the population, they would like a secondary suite, and it has been really difficult for them to get that done. One, it wasn't even legal in any way, shape, or form until about a little over a year ago, a year and a half, which is really slow moving considering Victoria, the city proper, I think approved them in like 2012. So we are a decade behind in Oak Bay. And then on top of that, their requirements for a legal secondary suite are quite stringent as far as noise and a sound barrier going. I mean, even speaking with an inspector as recent as last week, it was said to me that not only would ResBar be likely required on the ceiling, but it would be required on the walls to obtain this sound. That is not realistic.
No.
A suite myself with ResBar, it's a ton. It takes a bit of work, extra labor, skilled know-how, but on top of that, the expense is really out of reach for most residents, I think.
So a lot of requirements there. So it sounds like it's quite onerous. Thank you for the call from Fernwood and the shout out to Fernwood as well. Andrew is on the line at Salt Spring Island. And tell us about the housing crises on the Gulf Islands, Andrew. Hi, Andrew. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yes, go ahead. Tell us about the housing crises on the Gulf Islands.
Oh, I mean, it's bad. I mean, it's like the rest of the country to a degree, except a lot of the programs that are coming out aren't helping the islands. We're not being brought into them. Our minister has even tried to fight for that. But I mean, my concern is that countrywide, why don't we have some kind of system to incentivize resident, as in people living within the home, ownership versus non-resident ownership? And again, this isn't for people from far away, that aren't Canadians. I'm talking about people that often have multiple homes for investment. That's part of what's driving up our rentals, and many of them go short-term rental route, etc. But if we altered the tax system so that essentially all properties were high commercial tax until you essentially prove what it was you were using it for. Short-term rentals would get, the highest tax, and suddenly it would be very difficult for them to go. Now, they they argue that, well, in many areas that they're needed. Well, that's because the government's been having to buy up these little motels that couldn't make it because of all the short-term rentals.
Okay. Andrew, thank you so much. I'm sorry to jump in. I'm just running out of time here, but you bring out a point there, right? A really interesting point in that we've been talking about supply, but also the demand that's there. Some of it is from investors. We hear this a lot, right? Professor Protzer, how do you deal with that then, that it is residents, people who need the housing, who are able to get into these units?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the whole reason, people, people complain about the financialization of the housing market and everything like that. And the whole reason that's even possible to begin with is because of artificial supply constraints. If you have a situation where there's not enough supply in the market so that it can't respond to the demand that exists, then it's very easy for it to turn into a speculative bubble, and for you to get situations exactly like what we're talking about, where a property will be bought up, on a speculative basis for investors and not really to live in or to be used as an Airbnb or something like that. So, I think the real solution at the end of the day is actually to fix the supply at the end of the day.
And it sounds like also, getting social buy-in is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because different countries do this differently, right? Canada and other English-speaking countries, they have housing decided at a very local level. And that means it's really easy for, say a group of angry neighbors to go to their local politician and shut down a local apartment building. But other countries that are also democratic do housing policy at, say, the national level. Japan is a really great example, where they do housing nationally. There's only 13 zones in the whole country. It's democratic, but it means you remove that NIMBY element and a lot more housing gets built.
It's a fascinating discussion, and we'll continue. So great to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Eric Protzer is Senior Research Fellow with the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Great to be with you today. That is it for our show. My thanks to everyone who called in and joined our discussion. You can always email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Watch us again on demand on YouTube. Now, before we go, an update on that flood at a hospital in Mission. Fraser Health has just sent out an update. Mission Memorial Hospital's emergency department is now open in a temporary location within the hospital. It offers the same emergency medicine services as the regular emergency department. It will stay open until that remediation of the regular space is complete. More on that throughout the day here on CBC. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you for joining us on BC Today. Have a great afternoon.